In this video, I'm going to continue our example of creating objects that correspond to products in a grocery store. And in particular, we were thinking that every product had at least the following information. The SKU, which is the shopkeeping unit, which is how the store tracks the product. The product will have a name, it will have a brand, it will have a manufacturer, and then if we're thinking about doing things like storing this product in a warehouse or even on the shelf in a grocery store, we need to know its dimensions. So we're thinking here that as a list we need its width, its depth, its height, and the units that those three dimensions are given in. And another very important thing with respect to storing anything is going to be its weight, and that weight will also have some units. So that's what we're thinking about. Now, this is just an example. We might, in real life, want to add other characteristics of this product, such as whether it had any special storage requirements like refrigeration or being in the freezer. But I'm just going to go ahead and limit our variables here to the ones that I have talked about. Now, using this structure for the data that is associated with every product in the grocery store, let's think about creating an object for a particular product. And I'm going to use as an example the product skim milk. So objects are created in Python using the class statement. The object will then need a name, and I'm going to use the name VGSM. And this will be followed then by a colon. Now, this works in a fashion very similar to the way functions work. This colon signals to Python that a block of code is coming, which must be indented, that is associated with this class statement and belongs to it. So now we're going to start specifying the data that belongs to this object. So the first data item is the SKU. And in this case, the SKU is going to be DAR023. So that's the code that is going to uniquely identify the product in the grocery store. Now, the product also has a name. And in this particular case, the name is VG, skim milk. The product will also have a brand. And in this particular case, the brand is the house brand for the grocery store, which is called Very Good Brands. The product will have a manufacturer. And in our example here, the manufacturer is going to be Georgia Dairy Incorporated. Now, one of the important pieces of data that are associated with every product are its dimensions. And the dimensions, of course, are important in order to know how much space is going to be required to store the item. So we're now going to think about storing the dimensions as a list. So this is going to be a list. And in this particular case, let's assume that the width is 8, that the depth is 8, and that the height is 10. And this is going to be in inches. So that takes care of the dimensions. For storage and also self-checkout, another very important piece of data is the weight. And so in this case, let's assume that the weight of a gallon of milk is 2.2. And the units are going to be in pounds. So I'm now going to finish off the definition of this object, and I'll do that by putting a blank line at the end of this block of code that is indented. Now, as I glance back over the code that is defining my skim milk object VGSM, you'll notice here that there's this little triangle. The Spyder editor is trying to help me out by doing diagnostics of the code as I write it. The triangle is indicating that the editor believes there is some kind of error with this line, and if I mouse over the triangle, I'm going to get some kind of explanation of what that error is. This one, of course, is easy to find, and I expect that you saw it while you were watching me type in the code. But what it says is EOL end of line while scanning string literal, and you'll see over here that I'm missing a set of double quotes around the string defining the units of the dimensions. Now that my code looks like it doesn't have any errors in it, I'm ready to execute the definition of this object. So I'm just going to go ahead and highlight the text and then execute it in the console by pressing F9. And I'm going to go ahead and make the console a little bigger. And what you can see is that this code executed and there appear to be no errors. So now what I've done is created an object called VGSM with all of these data items attached to it. And I can reference those data items by using dot notation as follows. So for example, if I want to know the SKU for the very good skim milk, the VGSM, I go VGSM.SKU and it will print out the SKU, which is this DAR for dairy and product number 23. If I want to know the manufacturer, I can go VGSM.manufacturer, and I'll see that the manufacturer is Georgia Dairy. If I want the height of the object, I can go VGSM, very good skim milk, dot dimensions, and the height is the third dimension, which will be at index number 2, and I should get 10. And finally, if I wanted to know the weight, I can go VGSM and then weight, and I'll get 2.2. So this shows you how you can access the data, and in a similar fashion you can assign values into the various components of this VGSM object. Now the problem with what I have here is that this object VGSM only applies to the milk, and I can't use this template to create other products because all of the values here are already filled in for the milk. I could, in principle, create a different object for every single type of product in the store, but there are typically thousands of SKUs in a grocery store, and this would be an enormously tedious process. What I really want is some sort of template for the data, so I'll just call this now, instead of VGSM tied tightly to the skim milk, let's just call it product. What I really need is some kind of template for the data for a product that I can use to create these objects automatically. For example, with the data read from a database, with various values calculated, for example, inside of loops and so on. I really want to be able to automate this process of creating objects for the products in the grocery store. So what I really want to be able to do is say something like a new product. Let's suppose it's cereal number 12. I want to be able to define this by saying product and then filling in the values for the various variables. So its SKU, the cereal might be CER012, and its name might be VG Cornflakes. And its brand might be Very Good Brands. And its manufacturer might be House Products, Inc. And the dimension of a box of cereal might be 8 inches across and 3 inches deep and 10 inches tall in inches. And its weight might be 18 ounces. So the kind of thing I'd like to be able to do is create a cereal like that and then create another product. So for example, a laundry detergent. And so on. But I'd like to be able to use this product definition, this template, to create any kind of product that I want. And I'm going to show you how you do that. So I'm going to go ahead and comment out these 2 lines because they're not actual code. They're what I'd like to be able to do. Well, I do this in the following way. I start with class product as before, and then the colon to indicate that a block is coming. But now I dynamically create the variables for each product when I initialize the product by using a special function that I define. So we know how to define functions. It's def. And this function begins with 2 underscores, which is common for private data in Python. And then init, and then 2 more underscores, and then the open parentheses, and the very first argument is the word self. Self refers to the object that's being created, and this will become clearer to you if it's not right now when we actually use this in just a minute. But now I can put in the arguments. So the first thing I want to specify is a SKU. Then I want the name of the product. Then I want the brand of the product. Then I want the manufacturer, which I'll just call the manu. Then I want the dimensions, which I'll call the dims. Then I want the weight, which I'll call the weight, WT. And then I want the weight units, which I'll call weight units. Now this is a function that I'm creating here, so it has to end with a colon. So I've gone def underscore underscore init underscore underscore self, and then the list of variables that I'm going to want to create. Now I create the variables by hitting enter, and I have to be indented again because this is a subblock that belongs to this function. So I'm going to dynamically add these variables to the object that's being created by doing self.sku. Now I'm going to distinguish between the variables that are part of the class, part of the object, and the variables that are arguments to this function by different capitalization. But I wouldn't have to do that. Self.sku is equal to the SKU. Self.name is equal to the name. Self.brand is equal to the brand. Self.manufacturer is equal to manufacturer manu. Self.dimensions is equal to the dims. Self.weight is equal to the weight, and then self.weight units is equal to the weight units. So I've now defined a function init which takes the characteristics of the product as its arguments together with a reference to itself, and it just copies all of these variables into self.variableName. Now this will define a template that will create the specific variable values that you want every time you create a new product. So for example, I can create the milk product, and I'll call it milk 23 by going product, and now I give all of the arguments that I want to specify. So the SKU for the milk was dairy 023. The name for the milk was very good skim milk. The brand for the milk was very good brands. The manufacturer was Georgia Dairy. The dimensions were 8, 10, and in inches. The weight of the product was 2.2 pounds, and the units was LBS for pounds. So the first piece here that begins with class essentially defines a template that is going to dynamically create all of these variables for the object. And our first example is to repeat what we did with the milk. So let's go ahead and execute this. I'm going to select the class definition and execute it by hitting F9. And there it is, it's come through. And now I'm going to take the milk here definition and select this. And execute it. And I should have created a product, milk 23, with all of these characteristics. So let's just check. Let's see what its weight is, for example. Well, I get an error here that the weight's not found, and when I look back into my class definition, I recognize that I didn't capitalize weight here, and I should have. So I'll change that in just a minute. But let me just show you that this is going to work. So sure enough, milk 23.weight returns 2.2 pounds. Now, because of the way I've defined this class by using the init function, I can now use it to define any other kind of product. So for example, let's define a cereal number 12, and it's going to be a product, and its SKU might be CER012. And let's suppose it's the house brand as well. This is very good corn flakes. And its brand again is very good brands. And its manufacturer is a manufacturer of house brands called House Products Incorporated. And now we need the dimensions of the cereal box. So it's going to be 9 inches wide by 3 inches deep by, say, 11 inches tall. And this is in inches. And then we need the weight of the cereal box, which is going to be 18 ounces. Now, if I execute this line of code by selecting it and hitting F9, I get a cereal product created. So if I, for example, ask for its dimensions, I should get the list misspelled it. I should get the list of the dimensions of the product, which was 9 inches in width, 3 inches in depth, and 11 inches tall. So in this video, I've shown you the basic idea of structures. You define a template for the structure using the class statement, and any variables that you put in that class statement, as I did in the first example, are variables that are assigned for any member of this class, any instance that's created using this class statement. Most of the time, we're going to want the data to be unique to the particular thing that we create, to the particular instance. And I've shown you how to do that. You do that in Python by using this special function init that is __init __. And by using this, I'll call it a trick of referring to the self object. So what's happened here when I create something like milk is it comes in to execute the init function, and self is now milk23. So milk23.sku gets set to the SKU and so on. So that's what this self reference is doing. But I put in the word self and then all of the variables that I want to specify. And then when I go to actually create the instance of the product, like milk23, I use the class name product, open parentheses, and then I start with just the list of variables. In other words, I skip the self. The self here in the call to init is added automatically by Python. And using this approach, I can now create products of any kind just by specifying the values for the variables in the argument list to product. So that's the basic introduction to objects. You create objects in Python by developing a template and then actually creating instances, the actual objects themselves, by using that template.